She said it was just a night out with friends, but Ryan knew there was more to the story. When he followed her, he discovered a betrayal that would change everything. This is the story of a man pushed to his breaking point. Ryan Mitchell leaned back in his chair, the kitchen table groaning under his weight as he shifted. His rough, weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second feeling like an eternity as he stared into the living room, watching his wife, Jennifer, dart around. Jennifer's figure, still striking at 44, was draped in a tight, emerald green dress that accentuated every curve. Her blonde hair cascaded down her back in loose waves, and her face was meticulously made up, dark, smoky eyes and glossy red lips. She looked every bit like a woman ready to conquer the night. Ryan's jaw tightened as he observed her. His stomach churned with a familiar mixture of frustration and hurt. Jennifer had always been the life of the party when they first met, but recently, that party seemed to exclude him more and more. "Jennifer," he called out, his voice low and gruff with barely contained tension. "This is the third time this month. I told you, I don't want you going to those parties with your friends again. Nothing good comes from them." Jennifer barely paused as she continued to adjust her lipstick in the hallway mirror, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. "Ryan, who do you think you are telling me what to do? I'm not some housewife from the 1950s. I don't need your permission." Her words, calm and dismissive, made Ryan's blood boil. He slammed the coffee mug down on the table, spilling some of the liquid onto the worn wood. In 3 long strides, his broad figure filled the doorway. "If you walk out that door tonight, don't bother coming back," Ryan said, his voice dangerously calm. "I'm serious, Jennifer. I won't put up with this anymore." Jennifer turned sharply, her green eyes flashing with indignation. "And who the hell do you think you are? You don't own me, Ryan. I can do whatever I want." She snatched up her clutch from the hallway table and, without another word, brushed past him. Her perfume lingered in the air as the front door slammed behind her, echoing through the now silent house. Ryan stood there, staring at the closed door, his mind racing. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about the months of growing distance, of lies, and of Jennifer's gradual disappearance from the marriage. The Jennifer he once knew seemed like a ghost now, always out, never present. As the initial shock of her departure faded, a cold determination settled over him. He wasn't going to let this go, not this time. Ryan needed answers, and he would get them tonight. Grabbing his leather jacket off the coat rack, he stormed outside into the cool night air. He knew where she and her friends liked to go, a trendy downtown nightclub called the Ember Room, known for its long lines and booming music. But tonight, he wasn't going there to party. The drive downtown was a blur of passing streetlights and distant honking horns. Ryan's knuckles gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with possibilities of what he might find. None of them were good. He parked his truck across the street from the Ember Room, the neon sign glowing ominously against the night sky. The thumping bass of the music was palpable even from inside his car. Crowds of people stood outside, waiting to get in, laughing, chatting, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside Ryan. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. His eyes never left the entrance, scanning for any sign of Jennifer. Just as doubt began to creep in, wondering if she had gone somewhere else, he saw a taxi pull up. His breath caught in his throat as Jennifer stepped out, followed by her friend. But it was the third person who emerged from the cab that made Ryan's blood run cold, Zach Harris. Zach was younger, more polished than Ryan, with dark hair that was always perfectly styled. He was a local promoter, smooth-talking and charming, and he'd been around Jennifer and her friends more times than Ryan could stomach. Ryan sat frozen in the car, his pulse quickening as he watched them. Jennifer laughed at something Zach said as she looped her arm around his, her body close, too close. Zach's hand lingered on her lower back, sliding dangerously low. The scene hit Ryan like a physical blow. He had suspected something for months, the late nights, the lies, the growing distance between them, but seeing it unfold before his eyes made it all too real. Every late-night excuse Jennifer had given him suddenly fit into place. This was what she had been hiding. His first instinct was to storm across the street, confront them both right there, in front of everyone. His hands tightened into fists, the urge to act nearly overwhelming. But as he watched Jennifer laugh and lean into Zach, a different kind of resolve settled over him. This wasn't the time for a public spectacle. No, this required something more calculated. Ryan started his truck, the engine roaring to life, and pulled away from the curb. His mind was already racing ahead, formulating a plan. He'd confront her, but on his terms. Tonight, he had seen enough to know the truth. The drive back home was a quiet blur, the familiar hum of the radio turned off. By the time he pulled into the driveway, his initial shock had hardened into something colder, sharper, determination. Inside the house, Ryan didn't bother turning on the lights. He sat in the dark, in the same spot at the kitchen table where he had been hours earlier. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, but his focus was elsewhere. He had tried to talk, tried to fix things before, but now he knew there was nothing left to salvage. It was well past 2 a.m. when he heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. The front door opened, and Jennifer stumbled in, laughing softly to herself. The smell of alcohol and the distinct scent of unfamiliar cologne followed her into the house. "Get out," Ryan's voice cut through the darkness, steady and cold. Jennifer jumped, startled by his voice. She fumbled for the light switch, blinking as the kitchen was bathed in a sudden, harsh glow. "What are you talking about?" she slurred, her confusion evident. Ryan stood slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. "Your things are packed. They're outside. You're not living here anymore." Jennifer's laughter faded, her eyes widening as the gravity of his words sank in. "You're serious?" she asked, taking a step toward him. "Ryan, you're throwing me out." Without a word, Ryan walked to the front door and yanked it open. Outside, on the porch, sat a stack of suitcases and boxes. Her things. Neatly packed. "Go be with Zach," Ryan said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You two deserve each other. And don't come back." The color drained from Jennifer's face as she realized Ryan knew about Zach. "Wait, Ryan," she started, panic rising in her voice. But Ryan was done listening. He grabbed her arm, not roughly, but firmly, and guided her toward the door. Jennifer stumbled onto the porch, her high heels catching on the doormat. Before she could turn around, the door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing in the cool night air. She began to pound her fists against the door. "Ryan, open the door. We need to talk about this." But he didn't answer. Ryan stood on the other side, listening to her frantic pleas, feeling nothing. The woman he had once loved, the life they had built together, now felt like a distant memory. Jennifer's words, her promises, her lies, they were all empty now. He had reached the end. As her cries grew more desperate, Ryan turned and walked away from the door. He had decisions to make, a life to rebuild. And for the first time in their marriage, he was choosing himself. In the quiet of the darkened house, Ryan pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Hi, Sam. It's Ryan. I need your help. I'm filing for divorce." The following morning, Ryan found himself sitting in the sleek, modern office of Samantha Harper, his newly hired divorce attorney. The room, with its clean lines and minimalist decor, was a stark contrast to the chaos in Ryan's life. Samantha, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s, was flipping through the notes on her desk. "Ryan," she began, looking up at him, "I understand you want to file for divorce immediately. No separation period, no attempts at reconciliation." "That's right," Ryan said, his jaw set. "I'm done." Samantha studied him for a moment, leaning back in her chair. Divorces can get messy fast, especially with infidelity involved. Are you prepared for what's coming? Ryan's eyes narrowed. I'm not backing down, if that's what you're asking. Jennifer made her choice. Now she can live with the consequences. Samantha nodded, a slight smile of approval on her face. All right. I'll file the paperwork today. In the meantime, I'll need you to gather every piece of evidence you have regarding Jennifer's affair and any financial discrepancies, text messages, photos, bank statements, anything that supports your case. I'll have it all to you by tomorrow, Ryan replied, already mentally sorting through the months of evidence he had quietly accumulated. As he left Samantha's office, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Jennifer's name flashed on the screen. He stared at it for a moment, then declined the call without hesitation. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal preparations. Ryan threw himself into his work, trying to keep his mind occupied. But no amount of work could completely numb the reality of what lay ahead. The divorce proceedings had begun, and Ryan was ready for the fight. One crisp morning, Ryan found himself seated in a conference room, facing Jennifer and her attorney, Ethan Carlisle, for their first mediation session. The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan, a tall man with silver hair and a polished smile, broke the silence first. Mr. Mitchell, my client wants to resolve this as amicably as possible. Perhaps we can come to an agreement that's fair for both parties. Ryan's eyes flicked toward Jennifer, who sat silently, her hands nervously clasped in her lap. He turned back to Ethan, his voice cold. There's nothing to discuss. Your client violated our marriage vows, and she spent our money recklessly. She'll get what she's entitled to, and nothing more. Jennifer's composure cracked. Ryan, please. We can talk about this. I made a mistake. A mistake? Ryan cut her off sharply. Is that what you call months of lying and sneaking around? You spent our savings on your nights out and your new boyfriend. Ethan cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the meeting. Now, Mr. Mitchell, let's avoid accusations unless you have proof. We have plenty of proof, Samantha interjected smoothly, pulling out a thick folder. Mr. Carlisle, would you like to review the text messages and photos, or perhaps the bank statements showing the thousands spent at clubs and hotels? Jennifer's face paled as Samantha laid out the evidence, piece by piece, meticulously documenting every betrayal. You were spying on me. Jennifer sputtered, her voice barely above a whisper, her wide eyes fixed on Ryan. Ryan met her gaze, unflinching. I was protecting myself. And it looks like I was right to do so. The mediation ended in a stalemate, with Ethan requesting more time to review the evidence. As they left the room, Jennifer reached out, grabbing Ryan's arm. Ryan, please. Let's talk. Just us. Ryan shook off her grip, his expression unreadable. There's nothing left to say, Jennifer. Days stretched into weeks as the divorce proceedings trudged forward. Ryan buried himself in work, taking on larger projects and longer hours. The construction site became his sanctuary, offering him the solace that he desperately needed. The manual labor, the sound of tools, and the rhythm of the work helped him forget, if only for a while, the legal battle that loomed over his personal life. One evening, as Ryan was locking up the site's office, he spotted a familiar figure leaning against his truck, Zach Harris. He stood there with an uncomfortable expression, a far cry from his usual smooth demeanor. Hey, Ryan. Can we talk? Zach called out, his voice quieter than usual. Ryan's hands instinctively clenched into fists, but he kept his voice level. We have nothing to talk about. Get lost. Zach raised his hands in a placating gesture. I get it, man. You're angry, you have every right to be. But Jennifer, she's a wreck. She regrets everything. Ryan let out a cold, harsh laugh. And what? You think that makes it all okay? That I'm supposed to forgive and forget. Zach opened his mouth to respond, but Ryan cut him off. Let me make something clear, Zach. He stepped closer, his voice dangerously low. I don't care about Jennifer's regrets. And I definitely don't care about your guilt. You both made your choices. Now, you have to live with them. If I see you around here again, you'll regret it. Zach swallowed hard, his face paling slightly. He nodded quickly and backed away, retreating to his car. Ryan watched as he drove off, a mixture of anger and disgust brewing in his chest. The next day, Ryan sat in the courtroom, listening to Jennifer's attorney, Ethan Carlisle, spin a story of emotional neglect and isolation. Ethan's voice was filled with false sympathy as he painted a picture of Jennifer as a lonely, misunderstood wife who had been driven to seek comfort elsewhere. Your Honor, Ethan concluded smoothly, my client simply asks for what is fair. Half of the marital assets, including the house and a share of Mr. Mitchell's retirement fund, as well as reasonable alimony given the circumstances. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her early 60s, turned to Samantha. Ms. Harper, your response? Samantha rose confidently, her posture calm and collected. Your Honor, while Mr. Carlisle's narrative is dramatic, it is far from the truth. We have substantial evidence that reveals a different version of events. Samantha meticulously laid out the evidence Ryan had gathered, photos of Jennifer with Zach, time-stamped text messages outlining their affair, and detailed bank statements showing Jennifer's extravagant spending on nights out and luxurious purchases. As you can see, Your Honor, Samantha concluded, Mrs. Mitchell's infidelity and reckless financial behavior are well documented. She violated not only the terms of her marriage but also her fiduciary duty to the marital estate. We request that this be considered when dividing assets. The judge's face remained impassive as she reviewed the stack of evidence. I will need time to thoroughly review all of this. We will reconvene next week for my decision. As Ryan stood to leave, he caught sight of Jennifer huddled with Ethan, her face pale and drawn. For a fleeting moment, he felt a flicker of something, a mix of pity and disbelief at how far they had fallen. The days leading up to the judge's decision passed slowly. Ryan stayed late at the construction site, poring over blueprints and budget reports long after everyone else had gone home. He was determined to stay focused, even as the looming court ruling weighed on his mind. Finally, the day arrived. Ryan sat straight-backed in the courtroom, his face composed. Across the aisle, Jennifer fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting between him and the judge. When the judge entered, the room fell silent as she took her seat. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, she began, I am ready to deliver my ruling. Ryan held his breath, his gaze steady on the judge as she spoke. In the matter of the division of assets, I find in favor of Mr. Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell's documented infidelity and financial irresponsibility have significantly impacted the marital estate. Therefore, the house and the majority of shared assets will remain with Mr. Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell will retain her personal belongings and a small portion of the joint savings account. A small gasp escaped Jennifer's lips, but she quickly silenced it. Ryan remained still, his expression unreadable. Furthermore, the judge continued, given Mrs. Mitchell's current unemployment and the circumstances of the divorce, no alimony will be awarded. This decision is final. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck, echoing through the courtroom. Ryan rose to his feet and turned to Samantha, shaking her hand firmly. Thank you, he said, his voice low and grateful. As they made their way toward the exit, Jennifer rushed over, her eyes wide with desperation. Ryan, please. You can't do this to me. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? Ryan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. The vibrant, confident woman he had once known seemed reduced to a desperate, pleading figure. You'll figure it out, Jennifer, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. But you'll do it without me. Without another word, Ryan walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind the broken remains of his marriage and the woman who had betrayed him. The sunlight hit his face as he stepped outside, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had won the battle, but more importantly, he had finally let go of the past. Ryan stood at the front door of his home, key in hand, staring at the familiar facade. For months, the house had been a battlefield, filled with tension, anger, and silence. But tonight, for the first time, it felt different. The quiet was no longer oppressive. It felt like peace. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was still, bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. The familiar creak of the floorboards followed him as he walked through the living room and into the kitchen. He opened the fridge, grabbed a cold bottle of beer, and made his way to the back porch. The night air was cool as he settled into his favorite chair, the wood creaking under his weight. Ryan took a long swig of beer and looked out over the backyard. The sky was painted in shades of deep purple and orange, the stars just beginning to emerge. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. The past was behind him now, Jennifer, the lies, the betrayal. All of it was over. And as he sat there, taking in the calm of the evening, he found himself wondering about the future, about what might come next. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. Ryan glanced at the screen and saw a familiar name, Mark, his old friend from the construction crew. "Hey, Ryan." Mark's voice boomed through the speaker. "Heard the news. Divorce is final, huh?" Ryan nodded to himself. "Yeah. It's done. Good for you, man. A bunch of us are heading out for drinks tonight. You should come. Celebrate your freedom a little." Ryan hesitated, considering the offer. The thought of staying home in solitude was tempting, but something about Mark's invitation stirred something in him. Maybe it was time to step back into the world. Maybe it was time to start living again. "You know what?" Ryan said, surprising himself. "I think I will. Send me the address." An hour later, Ryan found himself at a local bar called the Blue Lantern, a laid-back spot on the edge of the city. The dim lighting and steady hum of conversation felt oddly comforting. Mark waved him over to a booth in the back, where a group of friends had already gathered. "There he is." Mark grinned, raising his glass in a toast. "To freedom." The others cheered, lifting their drinks in Ryan's honor. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ryan found himself smiling, really smiling. As the night wore on, the conversation flowed easily, the tension and stress of the past few months slipping away. The laughter and camaraderie of old friends were just what he needed. They joked, shared stories, and for a few hours, life felt normal again. Toward the end of the night, Sarah, a colleague from the construction project, leaned in closer to Ryan over the noise of the bar. "So, what's next for you, Ryan?" she asked, her eyes kind but curious. "Now that you've got a fresh start, any big plans?" Ryan paused, considering her question. The future had felt uncertain for so long, but now, with the divorce behind him and the support of his friends around him, he felt a sense of possibility. "I'm going to focus on the community center project," Ryan said slowly, the excitement in his voice growing. "We've got some amazing plans for it. Solar panels, a community garden, space for job training and art classes. It's going to be something really special." Sarah smiled, her eyes lighting up with genuine interest. "That sounds incredible. You're really making a difference with that project." Ryan felt a swell of pride. "Yeah, I think I am." As they continued talking, Ryan realized something. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about Jennifer or the divorce. He was thinking about the future, about what he could build, what he could create. The bitterness and anger that had consumed him for so long had finally started to fade. The night ended with promises to meet up again soon. As Ryan climbed into a taxi and headed home, he felt lighter than he had in months. The future, which had once seemed bleak and uncertain, now felt full of promise and potential. Over the next few weeks, Ryan poured himself into the community center project. The designs were coming together, and his enthusiasm for the work only grew. One afternoon, while walking the construction site, blueprints in hand, Ryan heard a familiar voice call out to him. "Mr. Mitchell, do you have a minute?" Ryan turned to see Ethan Carlisle, Jennifer's former attorney, approaching. The sight of him stirred old memories of the courtroom battles and tense negotiations. Ryan's jaw clenched, but he kept his expression neutral. "Ethan," Ryan said coolly. "What can I do for you?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably, clearly out of place on the dusty construction site. "I wanted to apologize," he began, his voice uncertain. "For everything that happened during the divorce proceedings. I pushed things too far. It was unprofessional of me." Ryan studied him for a moment, noting the signs of stress etched on Ethan's face. "You did what you were paid to do," Ryan said, his tone even. "Yes, but I've had time to reflect," Ethan continued, his voice low. "Jennifer wasn't completely honest with me about everything. She's been struggling since the divorce, and, well, I just wanted to say I admire how you handled yourself through all of it." Ryan stood silently for a moment, processing the unexpected apology. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you, Ethan. I appreciate it." As Ethan walked away, Ryan turned back to the blueprints in his hands. The encounter, brief as it was, felt like the closing of a chapter. In the months that followed, Ryan settled into his new life. The house, once a symbol of a broken marriage, became a place of peace. His work on the community center continued, and his friendships deepened. One crisp evening, as he was leaving the office, Ryan ran into Sarah in the parking lot. "Hey, Ryan," she said, smiling as she waved. "Heading home?" "Yeah, I'm calling it a day," Ryan replied, returning her smile. "What about you?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner sometime. There's a new Italian place downtown I've been wanting to try." Ryan blinked, surprised by the invitation. He studied Sarah's face, seeing the hint of nervousness there. For a moment, old fears and doubts crept into his mind. But then he pushed them aside. This wasn't Jennifer. This was Sarah, someone who had been there for him, someone he trusted. "That sounds great," Ryan said, feeling a warmth in his voice. "Lead the way." As they walked to Sarah's car, talking and laughing about work, Ryan felt a quiet sense of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to embrace whatever came next.